awful. I tried to fix it, and you know what their solution is? Okay. Find the snap. That's a good one.
Okay, folks, so we're going to get started now. I'm going to, well, I'd asked you to try a little exercise. I think I'm going to wait on that for a little bit later and dive into some material that's probably going to occupy the full extent of today's lecture. On Thursday, we may return to a little bit of the discussion of that exercise that I asked you to undertake at the end of last class. So the last few lectures, we've examined some of the basic elements and building blocks associated with the system dynamics modeling technique. This is a technique which places emphasis on characterizing a system's continuous state over time. We have variables that vary in a continuous fashion, grow larger or grow smaller over time in a fairly smooth fashion over a continuous period of time as well. And these systems are characterized at a technical level by a number of features: the presence of stalks and flows, which define the state of the system and its processes by which that state varies, as characterized by the flows, with the change in the stalks being dictated by the flows, and the value of a flow at any one time being dictated by the values of the stalks at that time, by the state of the system. So here we're describing how the state of a system changes over time in a continuous fashion. We also took a look at some somewhat higher level elements that link together multiple variables within these systems. Things like feedback loops, which are associated with balancing processes, with processes associated with reinforcement within a system like that, can lead to instability, and in fact oscillatory processes. These feedbacks link together multiple variables, but always involve some stalk and some flow, at least one stalk and one flow. But again, the state of the system is captured by the stalks, only changes via the flows. And so if a nudge against one aspect of that state ripples around, it's by virtue of a series of changes which ultimately implement in flow and then push on that state of the system in the form of the stalk. So all those feedbacks involve a stalk and a flow, at least one stalk and at least one flow. We also talked about first-order delays, which are these kind of building blocks which are particularly simple in the sense that they are fairly easy to characterize. Their formulation in terms of the actual expressions or formulas we give is particularly simple, but they exhibit negative feedbacks. They're associated with negative feedbacks, and they're memoryless. No matter how long a given item has stayed within that stalk, its chance of leaving for a given period of time thereafter is the same. Conditional on it still being in that stalk, it's going to have that same chance of leaving per unit time for each successive unit of time. Okay, so there are these building blocks, and we knitted together these larger areas of a system, whether it's in the form of competing risks or whether it's in the forms of aging chains, out of these building blocks. So we went up, for example, from these smaller systems for first-order delays to systems with cascaded series of first-order delays, but in a sort of competing risk context. So here's for example, a first-order delay here, another first-order delay here, and similarly all along here. And with those sort of cascaded systems, we could capture actually systems which are not memoryless, which are memory full, which where an individual's chance of leaving via a given flow very much depends on when they came into the system, because it takes some period of time, say after they came in down here, to progress along each of these stages. Okay? The systems that we've seen can be quite large in their size. They can require some reasoning through to think about their behavior. And we saw how we could describe behavior, for example, of multiple cascaded first-order delays using Erlang distributions and probabilistic distributions. But the systems we've looked at thus far are particularly simple in a certain respect. And the key word is that they're linear. Okay? Yes, question there.
Can you return to that model you had open?
Yeah. I'm going to be returning to that in a few minutes again. Yeah.
How can you differentiate first-order delays from a flow that is not first-order delay?
So a flow that wouldn't, it's a good question, and I simply baldly stated here that this exhibits successive first-order delays. A first-order delay here would be associated with a situation where one of these, suppose we were to focus on this stock. I happen to know that this thing here that says annual likelihood of development of stage 3, that's some fixed constant that's independent of the state of the system, okay? It's some fixed chance of going per unit time, say per month, of going from here to here, okay? And because it's fixed, we call it because it's fixed, it exhibits the characteristics of a first-order delay. We have this certain chance per unit time, and you'll notice that this outflow here is dependent on some combination of this guy. In this case, it has to be this guy times this one here. I know that it is, and dimensionally, it would be hard-pressed to be anything but that. So in short, this is a first-order delay because it's dependent on the value of the stock times some constant. This is a first-order delay because the value of the stock times some constant. This is a first-order delay here because it's the value of this stock times some constant. Does that help answer the question? Now, we could imagine a case, and we're going to get to that today, where this flow is in fact not a constant. In fact, it depends on some other factor. Maybe it's the value of another stock. Maybe it's the value of this stock. In other words, now you don't have a chance of leaving that's always fixed, regardless of how long you've spent there. The chance of leaving may not be constant anymore. It may vary with the state of the system. Okay?
Just as a follow-up,
yeah.
All flows be categorized as some order delay, whether that's first, second, third.
The first order delay speaks. It's a good question. First order delay speaks about the combination of a stock with that flow. So you kind of think of them together. So the question is, I guess, could a given flow paired with its stock always be classified as a first order, second order? No, because some like an nth order delay requires n successive stocks. Okay, it requires n successive stocks with it, and we'll see today some flows that wouldn't be called any kth order delay for any k. Okay, so good question. Any other questions about that? I was just recapping some things a bit, but I want to get into sort of motivating what we're going to be looking at today. This is where things start to get more exciting and more intriguing, at least for many of us. People comfortable with what I've said thus far? Okay. So let's talk now about this phenomenon of linearity that I referred to. Okay. So let's consider a function, some function, from that is going from one input domain to some range, to some output. Okay. It's a function here. I'm speaking about a function in a mathematical sense, not in a computer science sense. This is not a function in C, although it could be implemented as a function in C. Okay. And so X here could be the initial state of a model, and the output could be, the number of people with some disease as of time t, right? So this F is the simulation, and takes in some input and it gives you some results, right? So we could have X be any number of different things, and we get some output from it. We run the simulation, it gives us some results, right? We can think of a simulation as a function from some input. Maybe it's parameter value, initial values of the parameters, these constants like how quickly or likelihood of moving through the system. But it could also be the initial state of that system, right? And Y might be some quantity in the model, the level of diabetes, the level of HIV, some cost that's been accumulated, the success of your business in terms of market share, any number of different things. Could be outputs from this model. They're the things that are calculated endogenously often. And we run the model to get those outputs, right? Does that make sense? We take this model, we run it on some assumptions, some input as described by inputs, like initial state and parameters, we got some output. Okay. So that's great. The thing is that it turns out that that there's a certain particular class of functions that are particularly well studied and easy to deal with called linear functions. Okay? And this is going to come back to why we use simulation. So forgive me for emphasizing this point. With linear functions, we have this very specific property associated with them. If we have some input A and some input B, the function applied to the sort of combination of those inputs, the sum of those inputs taken together, we could think of it, is just the result, it's just the sum of the results of the function on A and the function on B. It commutes nicely like this. The function operator commutes with the plus operator. We could flip them around. So whichever comes first. Here the F comes before the plus, outside of the plus, and here it's the plus is the F is here the F is outside of the plus, and here the plus is outside of the F. We compute F of A, F of B, and we add them together. So here we add them together first, and then we apply F to the result. Here we take F for each part, and then we add them together. Okay. So we call a function linear if it exhibits this property, okay? Now, oh gosh, that certainly wasn't intended. This is what I meant to say. For example, A here could be, F could be a simulation model, and A is some situation where we've reduced mortality, and B, we've reduced progression on to diabetes by some change, and we want to consider what's the effect of doing both together. All we have to do is consider the effect of doing one in isolation, the effect of doing the other in isolation, and add the results together. So when we have a linear function like this, we can, we're particularly flexible in how we can analyze it. If we know something, some input is the sum of a bunch of simple things we know how to handle, we can just apply the function to each of those things and then sum them up, okay? Similarly with a linear function, if we apply that function to alpha times some input, we just get alpha times the function applied to that value x. So in other words, we can just scale, if we want to understand how this function, let's say the simulation model, responds to some phenomenon in the small, we know immediately how it will respond to it in the large. It's totally transparent. It just scales up in that same way. If we apply twice the level of taxes onto tobacco, we know that it'll have twice the effect as if we applied half of that, if we applied the original amount. So X may be some investment here, the number of people working on a software project, and if it's linear, then if we apply twice as many people to a software project, we'll get twice the same effects we got out with the normal number of people to the software project, okay? So here, F is some function, and we could think of it associated with our simulation model. Now, this seems very abstract, but the point here is that for linear functions, it's particularly easy to understand how they behave with respect to some situation. If we can just figure out a situation that we want to apply our simulation model to, we can break it into a bunch of simple situations, know how our simulation model responds to each of those, and we can just, if we know how it responds to each of those, we could just sum up the result to know how it responds to the full situation. Here, the sum is merely, the whole is merely the sum of the parts. There's no need to run the simulation model in the full situation. We can just run it on each of the pieces and sum up the results. It's really nice if in the health area, if we have a linear system, we want to know we have intervention A and intervention B. These are two policies. To figure out how it's going to respond to those two policies together, we just have to know how it responds to each of them in isolation, and we're fine. And we're golden. And I didn't want to go into it here, but in engineering, there's a huge number of systems we work with that are linear. Things obey Hooke's law. You stretch them, and they pull back in a way that the force pulling back is linear proportional to how far I'm stretching it. Things stay in the elastic regime for long periods. So I pull at this thing, and it pulls back. And as long as I'm not going outside those routines, we can reason about that and reason about how it's going to behave in a very consistent way. It's this property of being able to divide things into pieces in engineering, which allows us to, for example, if we have a circuit and we want to know how it will respond to a waveform, we just decompose the waveforms into particularly simple things, namely exponentials, sine waves and cosine waves, and we know how it responds to each of those in a very straightforward way, and so we just sum up those responses to get the response to the whole. With linear systems, in short, we can look at a complex situation, and we know how the system will respond to it because we can decompose that complex situation into simple pieces. Okay? We can decompose it, we can take it apart into things we know how it behaves. And guess what, folks? All the system dynamic models that we've talked about at any length here thus far have been linear. Okay? They may have looked nonlinear in the sense that they have loops in them and feedbacks and so on. But with respect to the state variables, with respect to the state of the system, they're linear. And so if we want to understand, for example, the response of a system like this in terms of the number of people, say, coming out of this flow over time, to an arbitrary situation here with numbers of people, say, in each of these stocks, we could just simulate with respect to a situation where people are only in this stock, zero everywhere else, and then another situation where there's only people in this stock, zero everywhere else, only people in this stock, zero everywhere else, only people in this stock, zero everywhere else, and similarly for these other two stocks. And then we sum the results together, and for each of them, we're noting the flow of people down here. We sum the results together, we could know what it would be with just people in each of these stocks of the defined amount. We could decompose the situation into pieces that are particularly easy to analyze and analyze it. And it turns out if you do that, you don't need simulation, folks. With a linear model, you don't need simulation. Linear time invariant model. If you have a model that is linear and it doesn't vary over time, you can actually analyze it in what's called closed form. What does closed form mean? Can anyone tell me? I could just write an expression for it. I could just look at this thing and, it might like a bit of help with the algebra, but if you give me enough time, you lock me in a room and hopefully feed me in the meantime, I could come out with an expression for this system's behavior. And it would look something like it'd be a sum of various exponentials, and each of which has some coefficients I. It's a sum of exponentials, and it's going to come out. Why? Because We can decompose it into a bunch of pieces that are exponential, and we know how it responds to each of those exponentials. So we can write down a solution just directly without simulating it. But guess what, folks? The world ain't linear. The world is not linear. Even this very thing, I'm not going to demonstrate this. This is not owned by me. I know you would delight in this if I did. This is owned by EMAP, in fact, and they would give me a hard time. Well, my wife will give me a hard time with this. So I'm kind of at a loss. Where's a piece of paper when I need it? Can I? Okay, thank you. Elasticity works for certain regimes. It'll work to a certain degree. This is this is exerting a certain force back. The stronger I pull, the more it pulls back to a point. And then guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It enters the plastic regime. And it no longer pulls back proportionally to how much I'm distorting it, and it tears. The world, ladies and gentlemen, is nonlinear. And when nonlinearity enters in, things get much, much, much more complicated. I circulated for many years in the context of engineering professors. And engineering professors often speak a different language as do physicists and mathematicians. And I remember one professor commenting how a certain student was entering the nonlinear regime, which was a situation indicating that their situation was getting very complex. The point is that when we have nonlinearity, when you have situations which violate these simple principles, then our analysis is no longer nearly as simple. Now we can't analyze the whole from simply analyzing the parts. We can't simply analyze the pieces and expect to have an understanding of the whole. We need to simulate the system as a whole. We can't simply take it apart into pieces. Okay? And it turns out that in the sort of modeling that we've been talking about, nonlinearity has a very important role to play. And it's a role that is deeply rooted in applied math, applied mathematics. And to really understand it would require a whole course at least, or several courses, which we don't have time to do. But one of the things that we're going to be using is a particular example to motivate this, which is based on infectious disease. Okay, since the 1920s, people have been defining differential equations, and in fact, nonlinear differential equations, which are essentially can be described by these stock and flow models to describe infectious disease, spread of infectious disease. And these models have been formulated for diverse situations and used to gain great insights. And these models include a variety of factors, some of which are shown here: mixing between people, birth and migration in, aging and mortality, infection, and sometimes a set of other sort of additional factors like costs and quality of life, variability in context, etc. But some of the most important features of these models have to do with aspects of their behavior that reflect the nonlinearity in these systems. We'll start to see behavior from these models which are very different from the behavior of any one given piece. They're not simply like the sum of those pieces that we've seen thus far. That's not simply like the kth order delay, how it reflects the first order delays out of which it's built. With nonlinearity, we get not only features that are familiar from what we've seen thus far, like instability, like we have with positive feedbacks, but we see tipping points, for example, situations where behavior of a system will be very different. It will go to two very different results depending on sort of which it's the path it's taken. It may end up in one situation or it may end up in a different situation. Very different results. An example of this that I've mentioned to you is the case of software projects. I'm sorry to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I've witnessed projects going from a situation with very high morale. If we show here morale on the x-axis, and we show here turnover on the y-axis, for example, seen projects which have gone from a situation of very high morale, low turnover, and because of managerial mismanagement, they've ended up in a situation where they get nudged into this other regime and enter a vicious cycle and end up, in a situation with high turnover and low morale. And then they get stuck there. There's a lock-in effect. They can't easily escape that situation. Another aspect of nonlinearity. There's situations where you have multiple fixed points because of this. You can have situations where you have one outcome or another outcome, which can be very different, and they can have different stability associated with them. Okay, so we'll take a look at some of these features. Instability, as we've noted, is something we've referred to before, but we'll see it in a big way with infectious diseases and the spread of those infections. This is from chickenpox here in the province on a monthly basis. Oscillation and delays. We'll be possibly talking about that next time, but we'll see that it reflects negative feedback loops with delays associated with it. So we'll have these sort of oscillations where it declines to a low level, picks up again, has another peak, and we'll see why that comes out of this certain structure, this nonlinear structure. And then there's tipping points. And, oh man, this is off the right-hand side of this, just at the end. If we could extend this another few years on the screen here, what we'd see is a situation where after decades of going through these oscillations, suddenly, ladies and gentlemen, this infection, chickenpox here in Saskatchewan, suddenly dies down and stays down for decades on end. Why? Anyone? Vaccines. Vaccines drove it into a different regime, a regime which was associated with extremely low levels. It changed the dynamics of the system fundamentally, and it reached a tipping point, ladies and gentlemen, where we achieve what's called herd immunity. Any given person in a population, or many of the people in the population, might not be immune. There's many that are immune, but there's many that aren't still. But the population as a whole is immune. Those models that we were looking at before, with these sort of situations, because we could take it apart, we could take a situation apart into arbitrarily small pieces. We could imagine simulating one person in this situation and their flow through the system. We could imagine one person here. We could imagine one person here, one person here, any number of different places. And the behavior of the system with respect to 10 million people is nothing more than the sum of its behavior with respect to each of those people in isolation, with a linear system. It's nothing to do with inherently with stock and flows. It's about linear stock and flows. We're going to be now dealing with initially stocks and flows, which are nonlinear, and where it's very different. We can't simply total it up from the pieces of any one person here. And where now we can see phenomena at the level of the whole, like herd immunity, this resistance of the whole population to the spread of infection, which is very different, ladies and gentlemen, from the behavior with respect to one person. Okay? Here we've got a situation of tipping points, which is an example of, it kind of shows it. You can see it kind of starting to go down here towards the end there. And this is actually for measles and mumps, which is another case. Okay, another phenomenon of this nonlinearity that's extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, is that not only can you not reason about each person in isolation, no person is an island, no person is a solitude in these models, nonlinear models, but no intervention or policy is a solitude either. Regardless of whether you're a business trying to figure out your marketing and promotion strategies, or whether you're a health policymaker figuring out your intervention policies like vaccination and prevention and advisories. You can't consider these things in isolation and expect to add the results together. It doesn't work that way with a nonlinear system. You need to consider the things together. They may be synergistic. In other words, they help each other achieve their effects. Their effects are more than complementary. They enhance each other. Or they may be dinergistic. They may work at cross purposes with one another. Another example, this is doubling an investment doesn't yield double the results. You put double the investment in an anti-HIV, a condom promotion campaign, it doesn't yield double the results, right? Further, we can get in a situation where we have these multiple basins of attraction, where we have multiple endpoints and where we can get lock-in to those endpoints. And we'll see various equilibria come out of this. Situations which can be very good to achieve, like disease-free, and situations which we sometimes have to settle for where it's endemic, where it stays circulating in the population. Okay? And so we'll look at two different types of equilibria, particularly a disease-free case where there's no infectives. And what we hope is that this will be stable, not unstable. Why do we not want it to be unstable? Why do I say we want the disease-free equilibrium to be stable?
Because if it's unstable, the disease comes back.
Yeah, it has to stick around. And all it would take is a little nudge. If it's unstable, a little nudge. Like one person flying into the Saskatoon airport with chickenpox. And game over. Right? Spreads. Boom. One person to 2 people. 4, 8, 16, and all those numbers that we computer scientists have in our hearts. I'd recite the sequence. That'll be some other time. We can do that in office hours if you want. Endemic equilibriums, by contrast, we often want to be unstable. We want to be able to nudge it out of that and have it go away, for example. Go towards a disease-free equilibrium. But all too often what happens is our disease-free equilibria are unstable and our endemic equilibria are stable. It's sucking towards the endemic equilibrium. It's trying to pull towards the endemic equilibrium, pull away from the disease-free. So all it takes is one Ebola case to fly into Saskatoon, and now maybe we're going, maybe not with Ebola. It's not going to go towards an endemic equilibrium. But there are certain conditions that will go toward endemic equilibrium. Chlamydia, gonorrhea, many other types of things, okay? And even TB. So we'll see the use of what are called phase plots in this context. With nonlinear models, these come to the fore. Situations, for example, where we have two situations differing here, for example, only in terms of the initial number of infectives per healthcare worker. A situation where here it goes, this infection, here we have a number of susceptibles, here we have a number of infectives, and here we have a situation where it starts here and goes, in here the number of susceptibles is going down, the number of infectives is going up, so what's happening? It's spreading, and then people start recovering and so on. The number of susceptibles stays roughly the same, but infectives are going down because people are getting recovered. And then it goes to this endemic equilibrium. Only 25 fewer infectives initially. In other words, a slightly better, more favorable ratio of healthcare workers to infectives. You may get a situation where instead that infection ends up going basically extinct. And I'm looking at this here. Unfortunately, the scales on the graph are somewhat off, but it will end up going extinct with the full population being susceptible and no infectives. So it goes from one direction to another direction. There we are. Depending on the ratio of healthcare workers to infectives. All it takes is that little bit of a difference, that tipping point. And we go from a situation that's under control to a situation that's out of control. An outbreak that we're not able to control because we're constantly fighting fires, unable to keep up with it enough. An outbreak which is basically extinguished. Tipping point. And often what we're trying to do with our policies is identify where the tipping points are. Why might we want to care? If we're a company and we want to know where our tipping point is in terms of our interaction with the competition, or if we're a healthcare policymaker and we're reasoning about the health status of the population, why might we want to know where the tipping point is?
You have a budget?
Yes. You have a budget and you want to get the biggest bang for your buck. And if you can get near that tipping point, just a small incremental investment, for example, you might be able to totally change the situation. And change it in a strategic way, potentially in a way that leads to lock-in. You get in this perpetually, for many years, say, as a company, in favorable market position. Take Apple with its whole investment in, these highly complementary products like, iPhones, iPads, and the various laptops. So here we have a situation where you can strategically change the game. Or you could have an infection, like a childhood infection, that has been endemic, go extinct by a small bit of extra investment. And it'd be foolish if we didn't know where that investment is, where that critical tipping point lies, to stop, for example, at, short of this. Just by adding a few healthcare workers, we might be able to make the infection go extinct. So these are some of the motivations for infectious disease modeling in the context and the underlying feeling of nonlinearity. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the basic form of a model, and I think we'll do this interactively. So, ladies and gentlemen, fire up or any logics. Let's try this. How many people here have Vensim actually with them too? Because I got some questions about using Vensim. Would you like me to do this in Vensim so you could see? Would that be good? Okay, you've seen how it's done in AnyLogic, so we'll do this one in Vensim, and then then you'll be somewhat facile in both, okay? And you could see some of the trade-offs between them. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, fire up your Vensims. I believe the machines delivered by Seth should also have Vensim for anyone working from there. And I'm going to work with Vensim PLE. Vensim PLE has, I shouldn't be showing you that. That's the answer. Okay, so I've just called up Vensim here. Now, this is a version of Vensim PLE that I have. I think it's changed over time a little bit in terms of the user interface. So you may see slightly different icons up here than me. And apologies, I should have gone and downloaded the very latest version because I think they've changed a few of the buttons up here. But let me orient you with respect to Vensim, okay? Because there's a few salient differences from AnyLogic. One of the big differences is that Vensim is modal in character. What do I mean by modal? Is anyone taking 381 or 481? The user interface is modal. I don't mean Moodle. I mean it's modal. Yes?
It means when you enter a certain mode, the inputs change their meaning.
Yeah, exactly. So when I enter a certain mode, how it interprets, say, a click is different, okay? So I'm going to enter the mode to enter stocks. And I'd like to enter, ladies and gentlemen, 3 stocks initially, okay? I'd like to enter so I just clicked here. You'll notice it says box variable level, okay? And you click on the diagram. So we've entered the level mode, and we'll click on the diagram and we'll say susceptible, okay? We'll click on the diagram. We're still in this mode to enter a stock. It's not just like dragging it from the palette in any logic. We'll enter, this one will say infective, and here we'll enter one, and we'll say recovered. Okay? Okay. Great. Okay, so we've just entered 3 stocks. Now we want to enter the some flows between them. Okay, so initially, and I just want to stay consistent with this. I think what we'll do is we will we'll go into this mode here to enter rates or flows. Click over here and then click on the stock, and we'll say bursts. Okay. And so I'm in this mode for the rate. Yes, question? Does anyone have a question?
So you start by clicking outside and then find the click is on susceptible?
Yeah, the reason I started outside is because I wanted to have it go from this place is not, it's not in the model, it's outside the scope of the model. You click there and then you click on susceptible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then let's click on susceptible, to go from susceptible to infected, click on susceptible, click on infective. So a little bit different than any logic here, right? And I'll say infection. That's the process of, okay, I called it incidence here, but I'll call it infection. And similarly to go from infective to recovered, I'll call it recovery. You know? Who needs help? People okay? Okay. So I've just defined a set of flows, and I'm going to leave those as the main flows for now. Now we need to. So what else does this model need before it's complete? Is this model quantitative yet? Is it completely runnable yet? No. What does it need to be runnable? What do we need in order to run this? Initial values and what else? Equations for the flows, for the formulas for the flows. Good. For those rates. Okay. So I will tell you. We'll start with a simple one, which will be for this case of recovery, and specifically we'll have a first order delay there. I'll tell you it's a first order delay. I'm spreading things out a bit just by clicking on these. I'm going to have a first order delay associated with that. Okay. I will create a variable called, and you'll notice I'm going up here to create this variable. Okay. And it's going to be called mean time until recovery. Mean time until recovery. Yeah. And we're going to hitch that up in a first order delay sort of way. So this is going to be a first order delay from infective. The flow out of infectives is going to be associated with a first order delay. So how am I going to express that? Tell me what I need to hitch up to what? Okay, need to link it to recovery. What else do I need to link to recovery? Infective. Okay, so we're going to go into this mode here. It says arrow mode. It's a mode to indicate these logical dependencies. So we're going to hitch up recovery to mean time until recovery, and then infective to recovery like that. Okay. Okay. And then what am I going to put as the formula for this guy? I'll go into equation mode, and notice it's an unhappy camper about a lot of things, but that's why I chose them in black. But recovery, what formula am I going to give to recovery? How did I go into that mode? I went into this button up here that has what looks like a little equation in it. I went into that mode and I clicked on recovery. And what do I need to put there? Exactly. Effective over mean time until recovery. Good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. That's great. And we can make the mean time until recovery. Let's make it 10 days. You'll notice if you go up to model, you go to settings. Well, yeah, sure. I'll save this thing. So let's go up and save it to models, examples, exercises. Okay, let's create a new one. Examples. Okay, and I'll call it first SIR model, something like that. Okay, boom. And you'll notice I can pick here. Once I've saved it, I can pick whether it's day or week or what have you. So I did model settings. It asked me if I want to save it. I saved it away. And then I picked time unit for time. It's to be day. Okay. So I want to set mean time until recovery to be 10. Okay. 10. Okay.
How do you set the value of mean time?
How did I set the value? I was in this equation mode and I clicked on it and it lets me just specify 10 here. Yeah? Okay? Okay. Right. Okay, so now we'd like to get to the heart of the model. For now we're going to make birth 0. Okay, so we're going to spare ourselves thinking about births for now. Births is going to have a big impact on model dynamics later. It's going to have a key impact on model dynamics, so it'll give us a sense of why we get those oscillations, for example. But for now, it's 0. Okay? Okay? And next, though, we need to put in some logic as to how infection takes place. Okay? Infection here. So the key question is, what does infection depend on? Is infection simply a first-order delay of susceptible? If we want to represent infection spread, would it be fair to make the infection flow in the same way the recovery flow is a first-order delay involving infective? Would the infection flow be a first-order delay involving susceptible?
Yes.
Okay, so think about a susceptible. Their chance per unit time of getting infected, is that a fixed thing?
It's based on the number of people who are already infected.
Okay. So it's not a constant. Instead, it depends on the number of infectives, right? And ladies and gentlemen, that is the heart. This is going to be where the nonlinearity comes in. Now we have not just a situation where the recovery flow depends linearly, some constant times the number of infectives, but instead we have a situation where the rate of infection, how many people per unit time are getting infected, depends on the number of susceptibles and the number of infectives, both. And we'll see how this plays out. So, we're going to go through a little reasoning about how this goes out. And this is indicative of the sort of reasoning you'll often use with these sort of models. And it's the heart of the reasoning that's used for infectious disease models. It's sort of the small essence that really goes into infectious disease models in a system dynamics context, in an aggregate context. So the idea, folks, is this. That these susceptibles are going to have some chance of becoming infected per unit time, right? We want to figure out what that chance is. We're going to call that chance that they get infected per unit time. We're going to use a very special name for it. Does anyone know that name? That name is the force of infection. Okay? That's going to be the chance at any one time that a susceptible gets infected. Force of infection. Okay? It's that likelihood per unit time. We want to figure that out. What is that chance? So think about it. Think about it from the perspective of a susceptible. Well, what sort of things would affect their chance of getting infected? Anyone?
Hanging around with infected.
Okay. Hanging around with infected. So, how many infected people they meet, for example? Yeah? And what sort of things might affect... Okay, first of all, is that all that... So if we consider the number of infected people they meet, that's admittedly very important. But what else beyond that?
Population density.
Okay, something about population density. So how many overall people they're meeting up? So maybe for how many people they're hanging around with, there's sort of how many people overall there, and then how many of those people, what fraction are infected? So they're meeting up. If you're packed, you're in a situation where you're in a packed room with lots and lots of people, what fraction of those people are infected? That is something which, both of which could be important. What fraction of them are infected and how many of them there are total. Okay, but what else? Think about Ebola compared to something that's really hard to transmit person to person. At least on a day-to-day basis. Toe fungus or something. What's the big difference there? How easily it spreads, like how transmissible it is, okay? So we've got three sort of things. So we're going to decompose into those things, okay? So one question is, how many people per unit time do these susceptibles meet up with, okay? So for a susceptible, I'm going to ask about their contacts per unit time. I'm actually creating a variable here. I clicked on this variable and said contacts per unit time, okay? That's one thing. The second thing, I want to ask about transmissibility, okay? Or probability of transmission per contact. I want to be per infective contact. For each time they encounter an infected, what's their chance of getting zapped? Does that make sense? Okay, I run into an infected. What's my chance of getting zapped? Could anyone think about something that might affect that? Something that might even change during an infectious outbreak if we were to want to simulate it down the road?
Personal hygienic
process. Age also, yeah. So someone who's very aged might have a higher chance because their immune system is weaker. A little kid who goes around, maybe putting all sorts of things in their mouth. Personal hygienic practices might vary with age. They might be more likely to catch something from a nearby infective. Hence, preschools are sort of hotbeds of spread of infection. Okay, so we have probably transmission per infective contact. A better term for it is per discordant contact, but contact between a susceptible and infective. But we'll just say per infective contact. Well, what the heck? I'll put in a nicer term. Discordant contact. Discordant. Okay. To edit that, I just clicked here and clicked there, and then you can go edit it. Discordant contact. Okay. Contact between a susceptible and infective. Okay. And then we want, what's that other piece though? Not only how many people per unit time overall they're meeting, and not just that chance of transmission when a susceptible meets up with an infective, but what's that other piece? Okay, there's transmission. Okay, that's a great one. We're going to just, for simplicity here, we're going to just imagine that contacts are of similar length. Later, we may get to the issue of different lengths of contact. Here, we'll just imagine that we're dealing with a situation where contacts are pretty well defined. If a contact, for example, may be associated, something that's pretty well defined is a needle sharing or something like that, or a sexual contact, or something that's a very well-defined sort of act. Later, the length may come into the equation, although not in this lecture. Okay, so but one other thing is important. Not only how many people overall they meet, but what?
How many of them are affected?
How many of them are affected? Now, we can put a variable in called that, right? So we're going to put in a variable. What, folks, from health science perspective, what do you say? What sort of variable could we say would indicate the fraction of the population that's infected? If we ask about the fractionation, the infection begins with a P.
Penetration.
It could be. Proportion would be another good, but there's actually a term of art for it in health sciences. It's the prevalence. Yeah. Okay, the prevalence of infection. Yeah. So prevalence of infection. Okay. Okay. Now, these two variables. Are things that we can set to be constant. So we'll set a probability of transmission per discordant contact of 0.04. We will set a contacts per unit time. Maybe they have 10 people with whom they share needles per unit time, or 10 sexual contacts per day, or whatever. What would we say for prevalence of infection, though? Can we go put a number there?
We'll do the infectives over the total.
Okay. So that is endogenous. These guys are exogenous. They're things we're just predefined, fixing predefined. This guy, by contrast, is defined in terms of the other variables. Okay. So one thing is it would factor into infection. What are the other factors of it, though? So if we want a formula for prevalence of infection, what would it be? Okay, divided by total population. Now, we could, ladies and gentlemen, we could just make it depend directly. It's susceptible, infected, and recovered. So it's infective over susceptible plus infected and recovered. But the software engineer in me revolts against that. It finds that a little bit, it finds it fragile, it finds it short-sighted, it finds it opaque, unnecessarily opaque. It's better to reify it as a variable, to actually give it a nice name, and so prevalence of infection will be infectives over total population. And then if in the future we have other things which depend on total population, we can refer to that one variable. We don't have to go place S plus I plus R many places in the model. And later, if we decide to add another stock, vaccinated, we decide to add exposed as another stock, we don't have to go change that 10,000 places in our model. We just change it one place, total population. Does that make sense? So the software engineer in me urges me in the strongest terms, do not just place directly the formula in there. Instead, create a variable. Create a variable with a nice name. And I'm actually using this to answer a student question via email too. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable called total population. And give me a formula for that, ladies and gentlemen.
Susceptible plus infected.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Vensim, like any logic, is persnickety, ladies and gentlemen. But they're persnickety in different ways, somewhat different ways. One of the ways that they're persnickety in common is that if you try to go to total population and just type in susceptible, it will, then some PLE will say, I can't do that. It doesn't use quite that accent, but it's something like that. And so what you need to do is you need to hitch it up with these dependencies here, okay? Just like that. There we go. Susceptible plus infective plus recovered. Okay? Now that we've hitched it up, it's a happy camper. It will let us do that. Now, the student question, though, had actually to do with an if-then-else. And how do you refer to time in an if-then-else? Because it was making similar complaints with an if-then-else. And the trick in both if-then-else and here is there's a thing in Vensim called a shadow variable, and actually it exists in AnyLogic too. You see up here it says shadow variable. That allows you to refer to a variable without necessarily connecting explicitly with where it was defined. So prevalence of infection, total population is defined down here visually. We're going to make prevalence of infection depend on it without stretching an arrow all the way up here and messing up the current planarity of this graph. So we're going to click up here and we're going to choose. So what did I do? I clicked on this shadow variable up here. And I clicked here, and I'm going to click on total population, okay? And you pull down from total population there. And now it can refer to total population. If we need to refer to time, we could have clicked here, and you could go pick, for example, time here. And it'll allow you to refer to it in the same sort of way. So what does this shadow mean? Well, it just means that this is another name for it. It allows us to refer to this variable without stretching a formula all the way, an arrow all the way up here. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so prevalence of infection, what's the formula for that, people? Infective over total population. Thank you. Okay, and now we're actually entering the home stretch here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in line to enter the most important formula in mathematical epidemiology. We're in line to enter the very kernel of this model, the sort of most distinguishing feature of this model, and the heart, ladies and gentlemen, of nonlinearity. Okay? So we want to enter the formula for the number of people being infected per unit time. Well, what does that depend on? Can anyone tell me? I've given you one hint. Okay, what else does it depend on? Contacts per unit time, and what else? Okay, good, thank you. And we'll give them a nice curvy look. Okay, so let's go to infection. Now, can anyone reason for me what sort of formula this will be? Okay, so let's imagine a susceptible. This is a key exercise, okay? This is a key exercise. If you want to understand this formula later, you might want to take down my notes here. Take down the notes here. About this reasoning, okay? Key reasoning about this at an aggregate level. And I want you to remember this exercise, because later in an agent-based model, we'll see we don't have to reason like this. This is a distinguishing feature of aggregation. We're reasoning about an aggregated situation where we sort of are totaling up over a population. And that's why we need to reason about this. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, consider a given susceptible, okay? We have a given susceptible, okay? That susceptible comes in contact with how many people per unit time? Contacts per unit time. Thank you. Okay. Say it's 10. 10 per day. Of those contacts, what fraction are infective? Well, we don't know about this particular susceptible's neighborhood. We'll kind of assume they're kind of a typical susceptible, and they kind of mix like in a bus station with lots of different people in the population. So the fraction of people they run into who are infective is pretty similar to the population as a whole. Kind of make this approximation. They're kind of an average susceptible, and they're going to be mixing a lot with lots of different people. So what fraction, so of those 10 people, how many are going to be infected? 10 times the prevalence of infection. So if the prevalence of infection, if half the population is infected, of those 10 people per day they run into, how many people per day are they going to run into that are infective? 5. Okay, so contacts per unit time times prevalence of infection, that we can think of. I'm putting parentheses around it just to denote. That's the number of infective people they run into per unit time, right? Okay. Now there's actually an approximation given. And you can go and you can eliminate the approximation, make it exact, and it's really not going to make a big difference for a small chance of infection. But the idea is for each of those infectives they run into per day, for each of those, say 5 they run into per day, It's given by this formula, the number of infectives they run into on average per day. Each of those is going to convey a chance. Each of those people is going to convey a chance of what? Of getting them infected. Probability of transmission. So if we consider their probability of getting infected overall, it'll be the multiplication of all of these, eh? And now, okay, if we want to say now, I actually should have done this a little bit better, and we'll break it out maybe in just a little bit, because I should have what is the name for this? That what stands before me is what? Can anyone summarize what that is? That formula gives what? It's something meaningful. It has a meaning to it.
Infections per unit.
Yeah, the infections, the chance of infection per unit time that a susceptible will face, and we call that chance of infection per unit time the force of infection. Good. Excellent. So if we want to know, okay, if that's the chance per unit time a given susceptible is going to get infected, how many susceptibles per unit time total are going to get infected? It is just going to be, if that's the chance per unit time they're going to get infected, it's just the number of susceptibles who are at risk, right? Each susceptible has a 1% chance right now per day of getting infected, and there's 100 susceptibles on average. There'll be 1 per day that gets infected. Does that make sense? There's 10,000 susceptibles, and they have a 1% chance each of getting infected. On average, 100 of them per day are going to get infected. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, because I wasn't artful enough in my pressing of this, the Vensim gods are going to complain bitterly. I'm going to say, okay, and it's going to say, oh, I don't know about susceptible, and I'm going to say, well, okay, let me go close it up. I'll put a nice little arrow there, and then it will come and be a happy camper after I call this up again, okay? So it's the same formula, boom, okay? So here's susceptible times this whole thing. But ladies and gentlemen, the software engineer me cries out. It cries out against this. Because this means something. This thing here is the force of infection. It needs a name. We should dignify it, ladies and gentlemen, with a name. And what name shall we give it? What better name than force of infection? So I'm going to actually backtrace my steps a little bit. I'm going to create a variable called force of infection, and I am actually going to refactor this slightly as I am wont. You folks don't have to if that is not in your impulses. Hey, oh man, don't. My version of Vensim is a professional version, and it eliminates this painful restriction. Okay, fine. Fine, I'll just go do that. Okay, now we have this force of infection. And now the number of people per unit time getting infected is just what? Yeah, susceptibles times force of infection. Now that is a thing of beauty. Well, at least many of us feel. So that's a thing of beauty. Number of susceptibles times the chance per unit time of susceptibly infected. A lot nicer than that opaque formula before. Hey, okay. Oh man, okay. It exhibits truculence again. So sorry folks. I've forgotten just how truculent this version of Vensim is. It actually wants me to remove the arrows now. Oh, come on. I'm sorry, folks, for leading you down this primrose path. Okay, there we go. I just removed the arrows with this Pac-Man. Now, this Pac-Man you have to be very careful with because it destroys things. It's Pac-Man the Destroyer, and it can destroy your model lickety-split. And so you have to be very careful about it. It can eat up arrows, but if you're not careful, it will destroy other features of the structure. So you have to employ it with care. But what I've just done, and I apologize for not having the foresight to put this in earlier, but I've just refactored things. So we have this nice force of infection, and perhaps it's good as a review to just ask, what is force of infection? It's contacts per unit time, 100 people per day that is susceptible to meet, times prevalence of infection. Of those, 50% are infected, therefore they meet the 50 infectives per day, say, and for each of those infectives, they have a certain probability of transmission, say 1%. So on average, they're for each of those, and so on average, all of this is their chance per day of infection. Did you notice, folks, that chance per day could be 5? So if they were to meet with 100 people per day overall, and of those, 50% were infected. So they meet with, on average, how many people per day that are effective? 50. And each of those conveys a 1% chance of infection. Oh, sorry, 1%. Then it's it's 0.5 chance per day of getting infected. Could that be greater than 1, though, logically, in some cases? Yes, actually it could. It just means that someone stays in the susceptible state for less than 1 day on average. You can have a chance per unit time of leaving of greater than 1. It's a chance per unit time. You can have a chance per unit time of leaving of 10. And for health science people, this is a hazard rate. You have a chance per unit time of leaving a stock in a first order delay of 10. And how long do you spend in that stock on average? 1/10. 0.1. Yeah. 0.1 time unit. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a probability. It's a probability per unit time. It's a probability density. Okay, folks, we're in our home stretch here. We're in our home stretch. What else do we have to set to finish this model? Initial values. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us set 999 people to be susceptible, 1 person to be infective, and 0 persons to be recovered. Now, the software engineering me exhibited displeasure there, because I would have given a better name to that 999, like initial population. But I stomached my displeasure. Okay, how did I do that? I switched into this mode here, equations mode, and I clicked on the stock, and you'll notice there's an initial value component here. And I typed 999 for susceptible, I typed 1 for infective, and I typed 0 for recover. Eh? Are people okay with that?
Did you specify birth?
Wait, I specified birth to be 0 for now. Birth versus 0. Yeah. Okay? Who needs help? 0.04. 4%. A prevalence of infection is given by infectives divided by total population.
Professor?
Yes?
The whole process of figuring out what the formula for force of infection was, couldn't that all be done a lot more rigorously just through dimensional analysis?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it can. Yes. So through dimensional analysis, you can figure out what the formula must be. At least up to, that's the simplest possible thing it could be. Let's put it that way. Okay. It's very nice. It involves a little bit of subtlety. We'll be talking about dimensional analysis, hopefully, in our last lecture or two of this class, and you'll see how it can be used very powerfully. But this is one place it could be used, absolutely. And it's very, very admirable to be able to do that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I just filled in 999 as the initial value, 1 here, and 0 for recover. Okay? So ladies and gentlemen, shall we compute? Okay, thank you. So I'd like to run a baseline scenario up here. Okay, so this is very important. This is the difference between Venn sim and AnyLogic. Vensim allows you to name runs, okay? The idea is that you have a scenario, you give it a name. So instead of creating an experiment in any logic, you create a name for the scenario. In this case, the name is baseline. And it will save away all information on that scenario as you run it. So you can later go back and reflect on it, okay? So let's run it. Type baseline, and I just ran it. It just ran before me, okay? And I can go and I can actually click on Infectives, and I will see something like, what did I do? I double-clicked on Infectives. It became the so-called workbench variable, and then I press this graph, and it allows me to see it. And you'll notice that this labels for the baseline scenario here, it labels the number of people who are infected over time, okay? And similarly, I could go over here and look at susceptible, and what would I see? It'll drop down, for example. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you see something interesting there. First of all, I should have asked before looking what's so interesting in that graph. Could anyone explain to me what's going on here? What's the initial state? How many infectives do we have? One. So what do we see here?
The infection spreads, then the population becomes herd immune.
Okay, the infection spreads. It's actually well put, actually. You've said something deep there. There actually is an element of herd immunity here. It becomes unsustainable at a certain point. It's like there's a fire burning, it gets brighter and brighter and brighter, it's consuming more and more and more wood, and then at some point, so much of the wood burnt around it already, it can't burn nearly as bright, it can't spread nearly as much, and actually people are starting to recover faster than they're getting sick, and there's fewer and fewer people to become infective in the first place. And so the number of infections per unit in time is just dropping really quickly because all these people recovering more so than getting infected, and there's fewer and fewer people to get infected and fewer infectors to infect them. So it's going to be dropping, and it drops down, and it goes essentially to zero over time. Let's look, however, at the number of infectives. Oh, sorry, number of susceptibles. What's going on here? Anyone?
They're all being infected and then living in irrecoverable.
Okay.
Some aren't ever being infected.
That is the key thing I wanted to check. Is it true that all are being infected? It's a large majority here, but there's actually a persistent set that are not infected. Why?
Herd immunity.
Yeah. At a certain point, the infection can no longer spread efficiently. It's like that leftover wood at the end of a fire. Have you ever noticed, if you have a fire in a wood fire in a fireplace, that there's some wood left over at the end? And you wonder, well, why didn't this get burnt? I must have placed it wrong or whatever. No, it's the nature of the situation that at some point it's just not going to be able to spread, and there's going to be some residuals. And so it is here. So it is here at the end of the end of the simulation. We have individuals left over. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's actually do an alternative scenario. Suppose we're in a situation where we wish to, say, treat people quickly. So maybe we treat them with antivirals, or we give them antibiotics if it's a bacterial infection, and we're going to lower this mean time to recovery. I'd like to run alternative scenarios here, okay? So let's just run a few. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, so we don't overwrite the scenario, this is important, we're gonna call this fast recovery, this scenario, okay? Say fast recovery. And actually, by just going up and typing that and pressing enter, it actually ran it. But let's go define the value of this variable for fast recovery. We're gonna bring it down from mean time until recovery from 10 to 5, okay? I'm gonna say fast recovery. Okay, so we just changed this. And now let's go up here and run it. We click up here and press enter. And it'll say, well, if it says this, say yes, go ahead. Alternatively, you can use this running man here, which is run a simulation. Okay. Alternatively, there may be a thing. Yes. Well, yeah. So I think you want to use a button, or you go up here and press enter. Okay. Okay. Are people comfortable with that? Let's go see what happens now. Now we have two scenarios been run. What do you think will be different between them?
More wood left over.
Oh. Okay. So more unburnt wood, more people who remain uninfected in the case of fast recovery. Where will we see the difference? Will we see it immediately? Where will we tend to see it?
Infection will decay more quickly.
Okay, infection will decay more quickly. I like hearing one. Okay. Well, there's actually a fair degree of difference. So the red is baseline. You can read this graph. Red is baseline. And fast recovery is actually blue. Now, you would have thought there'd be a faster decay, but it's not as pronounced. In fact, we have a situation where sort of the peak is delayed. It's not spreading as quickly. And there is this decay going on. It's not immediately obvious that it's pronounced, but it's really lowered the level of infection, right? Okay, so we've just seen a change to that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go change that back to its original value. We'll examine a different intervention, okay? Change that back from 5 to 10, okay? And now let's look at an intervention, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go up here, and we're going to call this intervention something like hygienic, improved hygiene. That's what we'll call it. Improved hygiene. Improved hygiene. Yeah. Okay. Improved hygiene. And what might we modify here to simulate the effects of improved hygiene? Anyone?
Probability of transmission for discordant contact.
Per discordant contact. So maybe this is people wearing a condom, or maybe this is people sneezing into their elbow, or maybe this is people washing their hands frequently in a hospital, right? Any number of different things. So we're going to, ladies and gentlemen, what did I do? I just changed, so before, I'm changing this probability from 0.04 to 0.02. Before this, though, this is very important, I wanted to emphasize, I had changed back this mean time until recovery back from 5 to 10. So we're examining two different interventions. We'll combine them in just a second, okay? But I'm examining them separately. Does this make sense? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let us run this new one. So the key operative thing from the baseline, the key difference from the baseline, the single difference from the baseline is that I've lowered here the probability of transmission per discordant contact to 0.02 from 0.04. So let's run improved hygiene. Ready? Run. Okay, so I just ran it. What do we expect to see now? Anyone? Oh, that's interesting. So now the baseline is shown in green. The fast recovery is shown in red. The improved hygiene, what has that done?
If the peak happened later in the
And it's really spread out, right? Eh? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we've seen these together. What if we were to simulate them? What if we were to simulate them together? Oh, we've seen these independently. Let's simulate these interventions together, right? What if we combined those? This will be the final thing we do today. What if we were to combine those two interventions? So I'm going to go up and create a thing here called like combined hygiene, hygiene with fast recovery, or fast treatment, I could call it, right? Okay, I'll press enter. And what do I have to do both of them? Change mean time to recovery back to 5. And this guy is still at 0.02. And so let's run it. What do we expect to see now?
A delayed peak that's even smaller?
Where is it? So, okay. So here we have baseline as gray. We have fast recovery as green. We have improved hygiene as red. And then we have combined with as blue. So where's blue? Just about. Oh, that's the blue fringe on the bottom here.
Professor, is it possible to do a log graph?
It's a good question. And let me see in PLE. And this one, no, but what you could do, it's a great question. What you could do is you could do a table of these, and then you could copy it to Excel and go over to Excel, which I happen to have up, and paste it in there, and then we could do a log graph, okay? Okay, so what's going on here? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We can't simply take half of the hygiene, half of the faster treatment, and combine them and expect to get the effect of the combined intervention. No, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't work that way. This is a nonlinear system. And what's happened here is that we've pushed the system into a situation where the infection does not spread. It's just not efficient enough to spread. There's a sort of herd immunity, you could think of it, although it's not quite that because it's nothing special about the population. It's more the healthcare system responds quick enough and people are clean enough in terms of their hygiene that it's not spreading, and it's not so much immunity per se, but it's an aspect of these situations, and it's not spreading at all. There's no outbreak occurring. Nonlinearity. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. It's different than the sum of the parts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to nonlinear models. We'll talk about some more implications next time. Thank you very much.
About the first question, just in terms of complexity versus marks, if you will.
Yeah.
So I have a model. I decided to do it. I was looking at some examples for something else I was trying to figure out, and saw something that seemed reasonably complicated. Just modeling like an animal population.
Yeah.
So if you've got like predators, birth rate, food supply, etc. I've got about 10 items or so in there right now.
Okay. Yeah.
With links and stuff. I'm wondering if that's sort of